Let's just jump right in because today's explainer covers a chapter that literally rewired human history. We're unpacking the absolute earthquake that was print culture. We're talking about how the printed word fundamentally shaped the modern world, a massive story full of technological leaps, cultural shifts, and flat out revolutions. But hey, before we dig into the timeline, try this quick thought experiment. Look around your room right now. You've probably got books, maybe a journal, printed labels on whatever you're drinking, and of course, the screen you're reading right now. Now, mentally strip every single bit of that away. What's left? How does information even travel? How do you know what you know? It's honestly kind of mind-boggling to imagine, but to really get the modern age, we have to grasp what life was like before print. Okay, here's the game plan for this chapter. First, before the printing press. Second, Gutenberg's print revolution. Third, religion, debate, and fear. Fourth, the reading mania. And finally, number 5, the 19th century reader. Starting with section 1, before the printing press. Now, print technology actually didn't start in Europe. Their earliest hand printing kicked off in East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, where they'd painstakingly rub paper against inked woodblocks. If we look at a royal workshop from around 1595, you can really see the massive amount of sheer human labor involved in the pre-mechanical age. Every single text was dictated, written out, and gorgeously illuminated by hand by highly skilled artisans. It was stunning, sure, but incredibly slow. Because no two copies were exactly alike, owning a book, that was the ultimate flex, pure luxury. Since books were so incredibly rare, society was fractured into two distinct camps. The vast majority of folks lived in an oral culture. They shared knowledge by gathering around to hear ballads, folk tales, or sacred texts read out loud. Then you add the elites. They lived in a reading culture, actually able to afford the luxury of reading silently and individually. Knowledge was tightly gated by who could afford the parchment. Which brings us to section 2, Gutenberg's print revolution. This is the technological spark that completely flipped the world upside down. Johannes Gutenberg didn't just pull his invention out of thin air. He was a master of adaptation. As a goldsmith who grew up around agriculture, he looked at an ordinary olive press, the kind used to squeeze oil, and had a massive light bulb moment. He realized it could press paper against ink. Using his metalworking chops, he created precise lead molds for the 26 letters of the alphabet. By arranging this movable metal type, he built a machine that could print 250 sheets in a single hour. That speed was completely unprecedented. To put that into perspective, check out this number. In the second half of the 15th century, European presses cranked out about 20 million copies of printed books. Fast forward just 1 century to the 16th century, that number skyrocketed to 200 million copies. 200 million! That is a true revolution. Books literally flooded the market. Moving on to section 3, religion, debate, and fear. Here's where things get seriously tense. It's a classic cause and effect situation. Millions of incredibly cheap books meant that dangerous, unorthodox ideas could bypass the old gatekeepers and spread like absolute wildfire. The biggest example? 1517. Martin Luther drops his 95 Theses criticizing the Catholic Church. Thanks to the printing press, his writings were reproduced overnight. His translation of the New Testament sold 5,000 copies in just weeks. Print didn't just carry his message. It was the actual engine of the Protestant Reformation. It fractured the church forever. And the traditional authorities? They were terrified. The Catholic reformer Erasmus wrote in 1508, "To what corner of the world do they not fly, these swarms of new books, filling the world with seditious books?" The elites were genuinely terrified of losing their monopoly on truth. That anxiety ran so deep that the Roman Catholic Church fired up the Inquisition and rolled out a massive index of prohibited books, just to try and put the genie back in the bottle. This dread was everywhere. Visual artists of the time captured it brilliantly. Take the famous 16th century woodcut, the macabre dance. It shows a print shop literally being run by skeletal figures of death. They were dramatizing a very real, mortal fear that unregulated printing and the free flow of ideas was actually going to trigger the end of the world. Section 4, the reading mania. So, despite all the panic from the top, the presses just kept turning. By the 17th and 18th centuries, literacy rates across Europe were steadily climbing. Churches were setting up village schools, and an absolute hunger for reading took over. publishers scrambled to meet the demand with cheap, everyday formats. You had almanacs for tracking tides, tiny pocket-sized chapbooks sold by peddlers, and the birth of newspapers for local gossip and trade. And it wasn't just fluff. Everyday folks were buying maps, Isaac Newton's physics discoveries, and the heavy-hitting philosophy of Voltaire and Rousseau. This is the crucial takeaway here. This reading mania armed the public with rationality. Welcome to the Enlightenment, where reason triumphed over custom. Armed with these cheap texts, people started viewing the world through a deeply critical lens. They began mocking royal morality and openly questioning despotic power. This explosion of print literally laid the intellectual groundwork for massive social upheavals, including the French Revolution. And that wave of critical thought brings us to our final chapter, Section 5, the 19th Century Reader. This is when mass literacy and universal access truly became a reality. The whole definition of a reader exploded. With compulsory primary education, kids suddenly became a massive target audience, birthing the children's publishing industry. At the same time, publishers aggressively courted women and the working class. Reading completely shed its status as a specialized skill for rich scholars. It became a basic, fundamental human activity. You can see this shift perfectly in things like the Penny magazine, published in England in the 1830s. Created by the Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge, it was built specifically for the working class. The covers were packed with imagery covering everything from astronomy to geography. It was hyper-affordable, highly visual, and designed to completely empower the everyday person. And behind the scenes, the tech just kept racing forward. By the mid-19th century, Richard M. Hoe perfected the power-driven cylindrical press. Remember Gutenberg's mind-blowing 250 sheets an hour? Well, Hoe's machine cranked out an unbelievable 8,000 sheets per hour. Information was now faster, cheaper, and more universally accessible than at any prior moment in human history. So, here is the question I want to leave you with as we wrap up this explainer. We've watched an olive press transform into a printing press, fracture empires, and ignite mass literacy. But obviously, the evolution didn't stop in the 19th century. Think about the digital revolution we're living through right now. How have the massive shifts in text technology over the last century, the internet, smartphones, social media algorithms, continued to shape our reality? Are we living through a brand new reading mania? Are we facing new fears of unchecked information? Take a moment today to really ponder how the ancient spark of Gutenberg's press is still fueling the absolute fire of our modern world.